You know, a hit song can come from anywhere. A billboard, a magazine cover, a summer romance, a TV evangelist, even a cheap bottle of wine. An inventive lyricist can find a song from virtually anywhere. One of the most prolific songwriters ever came up with songs from all the sources that I just mentioned, and then some. You know, one never knows where or when imagination will strike. That's what makes the backstory of a song so interesting. At least I feel that way. Let me take you on a little journey back to the late 60s to show you exactly what I mean. Come on board, take a ride with me to the outer reaches of northern Canada to discover the origin of a feel-good classic that you've sung thousands of times, I guarantee it. Story's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever ordered a pair of X-ray specs, X-ray glasses, when you were a kid, thinking that they would actually work, you're going to dig this channel of pure musical nostalgia. Make sure that you subscribe below right now. Click the bell so you always know when our new interviews are dropping. We have some great ones coming. Also, check out our exclusive content on Patreon as well as our latest merch below. Keeps it a daily channel. You know, there are a few things in this world that cannot be denied. No matter where we come from, what our belief system is, how old we are, or what we do for a living, we all have a few things in common. One of those things is an appreciation for the one and only, the incomparable, the great Neil Diamond. One of the best-selling artists of all time, he had a divine gift for writing romantic feel-good songs with some of the most beautiful, poetic lyrics ever written. I'm talking about songs like Sweet Caroline, Play Me, Longfellow Serenade.
I am the tune, play me. To you, my Longfellow serenade.
Neil composed songs that detoxify our souls. They made us believe in a mysterious universal force called love. Perhaps his most renowned feel-good romantic classic is Cracklin Rosie. Not just one of the most popular Neil Diamond songs, but one of the most popular songs in recorded music history.
Play it now, my baby, Cracklin Rosie, make me smile.
Cracklin Rosie, it's such a classic. It's a tune about a woman named Rosie that captivated him during a tour through Canada. The image of Rosie was so embedded in his mind, he just couldn't help himself. He had to write a song about this woman. Many of us have heard the spectacular Cracklin Rosie thousands of times. So the theme of the song that I just described, it wouldn't surprise anyone, except that everything I just said is fiction. It's not true. It had nothing to do with a woman named Rosie. And it wasn't inspired by an infatuation for any particular woman, or he just changed the name. It was actually a story inspired by folklore surrounding a brand of cheap sparkling wine labeled Cracklin Rosie.
Oh, I love my Rosie child.
Talked a lot about the incredible perseverance of Neil Diamond in the past. He was the epitome of a starving artist until he struck gold with his number 6 pop single Cherry Cherry. That happened in 1966. He had 2 monster hits in 69, the immortal Sweet Caroline, and the underappreciated follow-up, Holly Holy.
Good times never seem so good. Holly Holy.
They peaked at number 4 and number 6 respectively. But Neil became a bona fide superstar with his first number 1 hit. It was a smash, Cracklin Rosie. That happened in 1970.
Girl, if it lasts for an hour, that's all right.
In the dead of winter, Neil was touring through the great white north of Canada in the late 60s, not as romantic as in the summer. During one of the tour stops, Neil was interviewed by a local reporter. He was, very intrigued by the culture there, especially how people managed to live in such a cold climate. Neil turned the tables on the reporter, and he asked her questions about her family and to share some regional folklore. He was interested. The reporter proceeded to tell Neil that her parents were medical missionaries that gave aid to people that were residents of Indian reservations in northern Canada. Her parents covered thousands of miles in that territory and heard a lot of folk stories from the indigenous people that they treated. And the story that really struck Neil Diamond was the story about a particular reservation where men outnumber women 3-1. So on the weekends, some of the men who weren't fortunate enough to share the company of a woman, those lonely fellas, they would band together. They'd go down to the nearest general store and buy themselves the largest bottle in stock of a cheap bottle of sparkling wine that was called Cracklin Rosie. Apparently that bottle of wine became companionship for the weekend for these guys.
'Cause we got all night to set the world.
So instead of having an actual girlfriend to call upon, the unlucky tribesmen, they referred to Cracklin Rosie as their weekend sweetheart. And the guys would sit around a campfire and just drink Cracklin Rosie, forget about their troubles and have a good time. Now, I'm not a drinker, definitely not a connoisseur of cheap wine or wine in general, but even I can remember seeing bottles of brands like Boone's Farm, Zapple, Mad Dog 2020, and Ripple in the spirits section of the neighborhood grocery store, like I'm sure you have, or maybe you've drunk some of those. Do you remember any of those? Talk about it in the comments. Cracklin Rosie was a Canadian equivalent of those types of brands. During the 60s and 70s, the brand was manufactured by Andrus Wines of British Columbia. It was very popular among the indigenous people of the Northern Territory. You can actually still buy Cracklin Rosie today for about $19 a bottle. Now, understandably, the theme of Cracklin Rosie, it's been misinterpreted. That's because of Neil Diamond's lyrical genius, I gotta say. He turned a folktale about lonely men getting their kicks by drinking cheap wine into a song about jumping on a metaphorical train to enjoy life together. That's how this guy rolls. Everybody knows the lyrics by heart. Oh, Cracklin Rosie, get on board. We're gonna ride till there ain't no more to go.
We gonna ride till there ain't no more to go.
Leave material things at home and leave your worries behind. You know, like the transient journey of a hobo, Neil takes us on this stress-free ride of just happy times. Hitching on a twilight train, ain't nothing here that I care to take along. Maybe a song to sing when I want. Don't need to say please to no man for a happy tune. I love it.
Don't need to say please to no man for a happy tune.
Now this is something to think about. If Cracklin Rosie were truly about a woman named Rosie, the passage, Cracklin Rosie, you're a store-bought woman, that would definitely create some feminist ire, I think.
Winston, Cracklin Rose, your store-bought woman.
Picture Neil writing the song and deciding to incorporate that lyric. You're a store-bought woman. What would he be trying to communicate if it weren't for a bottle of fun that you can actually buy from a store? It would be a risky move.
Will Robinson, danger, no Will Robinson.
Yet again, we just don't have lyricists like Neil Diamond anymore, in my opinion. He brilliantly connected fact with fiction, reality with fantasy by coming up with a clever stanza that sets up a show-stopping a cappella pre-chorus. Cracklin Rosie, you're a store-bought woman. You make me sing like a guitar humming. So hang on to me, girl. Our songs keep running on.
Me, girl, our song keeps running on.
Play it now, baby.
Play it now, my baby, Cracklin Rosie.
Now that's the thing about Neil. He always likes to use the word babe or baby. You know, whenever he needs to transition to something else or a couple of syllables to fill in a blank spot in the song, he's always going to go with the word babe. And no one has a more resounding or iconic rendering of the word babe in all of pop music, I can assure you that.
Ooh, baby, baby, now. Ooh, baby.
Cracklin Rosie was not the first song that Neil had composed about the joyous effects of drinking wine. Of course, he wrote Red, Red Wine in 1967.
Red, red wine.
It was a stiff for him, but it had, of course, a huge renaissance with the whole new generation when UB40 covered it.
Red, red wine.
They, of course, reimagined the song, and it turned into a #1 single around the world in 1983. And then here in the US, it was #1 in 88, and it made a comeback there. It's a really cool story there.
Stay close to me.
Cracklin Rosie was recorded for Neil Diamond's 6th studio album, Taproot Manuscript. It was an experimental record for Neil, this one. Side 2, for example, was presented in a suite format that was labeled the African Trilogy of Folk Ballet. Conceptual tracks on side 2 mixed with rock, gospel, blues, and African folk included I Am the Lion and Suleiman. Cracklin Rosie was the lead single from this record, and it was the first selection on side 1. Now, as we continue to break down this classic, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. The glasses I always wearing my red ones today. With Zenni, you can choose and create your own pair of frames, from reading glasses to transition lenses to progressives to bifocals. You can also add blue light protection. There's migraine relief glasses. They have everything. Again, you choose the color, the shape, the fashion. They'll deliver them right to your door. All you do is put in your prescription. It's amazing. Make sure to click on our special link right up here to get up to 80%. That's 80% off regular retail prices. That's our special link.
Cracklin Rosie, get on board.
Cracklin Rosie featured the talented musicianship of LA's famed Wrecking Crew. There was Hal Blaine playing drums, Larry Knechtel performed the keys, Joe Osborne on bass, Al Casey on lead guitar, and Gene Estes, he executed the percussion. It was pianist, band leader, also songwriter Don Randy, though, who developed the bright, infectious arrangement for Cracklin Rosie. Like his fellow members of the Wrecking Crew, Don Randy was one of the best in the business, and that's why this song rocks. He perfected his craft, Don Randy did, working with Phil Spector on Spector's trailblazing Wall of Sound, for anybody that knows that history. Don Randy, he has an astonishing list of credits that total, I think it's over 4,000 titles. Since the early 60s, he's arranged some of the most celebrated pop standards ever. There's the Crystals' Da Do Ron Ron. There's the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations. Also Help Me Rhonda, Jackson 5's ABC, and Sammy Davis Jr.'s Candyman. Just to name a couple. I mean, this guy was very prolific. I'm picking up vibrations. Getting the job to arrange Cracklin Rosie for Don was really just good old-fashioned happenstance. He was at the right place at the right time. That's really how it comes down to it. He was in attendance of the Taproot manuscript sessions, primarily for his prowess as a keyboardist. Don played piano on gold phenomenons like You've Lost That Love and Feeling and Good Vibrations, and These Boots Were Made for Walking by Nancy Sinatra, just to name a few. Don heard the rough draft of the song, Cracklin Rosie, at the studio, and he casually said to his buddy Hal Blaine, "Boy, do I know what to do on this song." Hal then went to producer Tom Catalano and also Neil Diamond and told them, Don Randy had this idea. Neil invited them all over to his LA home to discuss a plan for this song. He wanted to hear what Don had in mind. Neil and Tom loved Don's ideas and they actually gave him the green light to create the arrangement for Cracklin Rosie. In addition to being Neil Diamond's first #1 single, Cracklin Rosie was Don Randy's first #1 pop arrangement. Another interesting side note about Don Randy, he actually created the award-winning jazz club, The Baked Potato, in Studio City, California in 1970. Just went there a few years back. I'm sure many of you have been there. Most of the time, a session that features the Wrecking Crew ensures an immaculate recording, of course. But on Cracklin Rosie, Neil Diamond pointed out a tiny imperfection that can only be detected by a trained ear. Again, very rare if the Wrecking Crew is playing on a track, but what it is, the initial recording of Cracklin Rosie was on a rhythm track, and Neil overdubbed his guitar part a few times. Then the production crew added Neil's vocals, followed by the horns, the bells, the cymbal crashes, and then the background singers, and then the bridge section. With a little embarrassment though, Neil admitted that the tempo on the last chorus is completely different than the previous chorus. It's actually the part where Neil sings Play It Now, My Baby for the last time. And then, the song goes into the modulation, the change in the song's pitch or key. In the case of Cracklin Rosie, when the song went into a modulation, the tempo inadvertently changed, and to Neil, it made the song a little disjointed. It was hard to groove to, in his opinion.
Play it now, my baby, Cracklin Rosie.
Neil is entitled to call out what he termed a blemish of his own recording, But even if you play that part over and over and you actually hear the mistake, it doesn't take anything away from the spectacular bliss of Cracklin' Rosie. I mean, I can't imagine the song being more perfect than it is.
Make me a smile, girl, if it lasts for an hour.
The super success of Cracklin' Rosie, that also led to Neil's breakout in the European market, and he began to establish a reputation as a very dynamic live performer. Neil's elevation as an international headliner was solidified with the release of the live album Hot August Night. That happened came out in 1972. My dad had every Hot August Night 1, 2, and beyond. Just an amazing live record. On Hot August Night, Neil and his band performed Cracklin' Rosie at the end of the set. It's a fully transformed version of the track with a faster, more intense, more emotional delivery. You gotta hear it. That's actually my favorite version of the song, more than even the studio version.
Playing now, my lady, Cracklin' Rosie, make me a smile.
Fans around the world came on board the Cracklin' Rosie train. It was so huge everywhere. In addition to its platinum achievement as a chart topper here in America, Cracklin' Rosie shot to number 3 in the UK, went to number 2 in Australia and Ireland, I believe. In New Zealand, Cracklin' Rosie was a number 1 song on that chart for 5 straight weeks.
Well, that's alright, 'cause we got all night.
The superstar emergence of Neil Diamond is one of the most deserved, I feel, of the rock era. And maybe one of the most unlikely, when you consider that throughout his adolescence, Neil Diamond felt like an outcast. His family, they moved around a lot, and he was constantly changing schools. This made it very, very difficult to forge any lasting friendships in his life. Neil was really a shy, introverted teenager. And he always felt like he just didn't belong. He turned to poetry and songwriting to express what he felt inside, but struggled with a lack of confidence to express that. Neil Diamond was definitely a late bloomer, but a late bloomer that eventually sold over 130 million albums.
To share, they coming to America.
The pop culture power in Neil Diamond's Sweet Caroline, it's rivaled only by Cracklin' Rosie. Both are stadium sing-along anthems, despite the fact that they're well over 50 years old. Sweet Caroline, that was, of course, inspired by a magazine cover. Cracklin' Rosie, that was inspired by a bottle of cheap sparkling wine. Fine examples, mind you, of pure songwriting ingenuity. Seriously, I continue to marvel at how Neil Diamond made such a feel-good standard out of a story about a cheap brand of wine that took the place of female companionship. It's amazing. When you hear the folktale of what Cracklin' Rosie wine was for some indigenous tribes in northern Canada, it's a story that's downright depressing. It is. But Neil Diamond remarkably found a spark of optimism and hope in the pitiful narrative to write a song that lifts spirits well beyond the facade of happiness induced by a drunken weekend. Neil's voice, it's as soothing as it is familiar. Like I said, my dad raised me on him. I've raised my kids on him. I hope they'll do the same.
Keeps running on.
Neil wrote Cracklin' Rosie during a very challenging time in his private life, apparently. The bitterness of a recent divorce lingered heavily in his psyche, and his personal life was very much uncertain at that point. Like other times in his life, though, Neil reached deep into his soul to express his emotions through his music. Neil wouldn't rely on a specific individual to give his life meaning. Instead, it was the cathartic process of writing Cracklin' Rosie that made him feel happy and truly alive. In many ways, the metamorphosis of the legend of Cracklin' Rosie is similar to the metamorphosis of the man himself, Neil Diamond.
Play it now, my lady. Cracklin' Rosie, make me a smile.
There's a touch of autobiography in Cracklin' Rosie, the song, that may have been completely unintentional by its famous author. I mean, after all, that subconscious act occurred when he wrote one of his early hits, Solitary Man. It actually took him years to realize he'd written the song about himself.
A solitary man.
Neil's career could have easily sank into deep despair before he had a glimpse of hope for even having a career. But Neil Diamond was vigilant. He hung on. He kept going, and he remained on board the train of determination, singing his songs and keeping his guitar humming.
Woman, but you make me sing like a guitar humming.
Neil Diamond took his time to set his world right and found a dream that asked no questions. You know, next time you hear Cracklin Rosie, whether on the radio or in a sports arena or on your private audio system in your headphones, the thoughts of a bunch of guys sitting around a campfire drinking wine may or may not cross your minds. And the image may be hard to imagine. But in a matter of seconds, you will be overtaken by a jolt of happiness and pure joy and sing along to that precious Neil Diamond treasure. Cracklin Rosie, get on board. We're going to ride till there ain't no more to go. Thanks, Neil. Leave us a comment about the great, the spectacular, the incomparable Neil Diamond and this classic Cracklin Rosie. What are your feelings, your memories about this hit? Let us know below. Let's have a Neil Love Fest. Love Neil Diamond. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe below. We would love to have you as part of our channel. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friend.